This book is called Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth, who is absolutely, like, all my students know this, and people who know what kinds of books I like to read know that Veronica Roth is literally like my favorite author of all time. Her first most popular series was the Divergent series. So if you read those or saw the movies or anything and you liked those, then you'll probably like Carve the Mark. All of her book series, just like Marie Lou's that I did last week, are all completely different though. So Carve the Mark, like I said, takes place in space, so totally different situation. I do really like this book because it switches back and forth between perspectives between the two main characters. It starts out with the boys' perspective first, so Akos is the main character that starts out the book. And then the second person is from a female's perspective, and her name is Cyra. And obviously I like this book so much and the author so much that actually when we got my cat, her name is Cyra. So you can tell just how much I liked this book and liked that character specifically, which is why I got the inspiration to name her that. Like, check out this cover though. This cover is absolutely beautiful, right? So, and it is a signed copy. I actually got this book when I went to a book fair, book festival thing in Dallas. So here's her signature, which is awesome. I try to get that on all the other, I didn't get it for the Divergent series, but every other book series that I've gotten from her, I have at least one signed copy, so that's pretty neat. And then this is like her map of some of the stuff. So she always has really cool, like, little art pieces and stuff, like the first chapter. This gorgeous little space page. So little details like that is really why I really like her stuff. Okay, so overview of this book is that it's taking place in a world, well, worlds because it's in space, where there's one kind of like majority bad leader society where they're going across space to try to take over other societies. And there's this constant battle back and forth between specifically them and the society that Akos is a part of, so they're kind of like sworn enemies. And then there's some planets that are like neutral planets that try not to get involved with anybody so that they're safe. This is a really good example of a person who loves world building. Since this is a completely different world, she's made sure to put a whole glossary in the back of all of the different names and stuff and like what they mean or something significant about them. So I look up a lot of stuff on this author, and she actually was a huge fan of the book Dune, which I just finished a couple of weeks ago. And so there's kind of some segues between that, because this takes place in space, Dune takes place in space, like on another planet. It's a totally made-up world with some made-up language things and names, which is what she does in here also. So there is a lot of inspiration from Dune, I think, in this book. But overall, I just love this book because there's a lot of great action. There's like a little love story in the background, of course. She always has like a love story in her books. And so that's what makes this book really great. So I'm going to read you guys the inside cover. Just to give you guys an overview of what she says about the book or what they say about the book. And then I'm going to read the first chapter only because it's a decently long chapter. Okay? So, overview. In a galaxy powered by the current, everyone has a gift. Cyra is the sister of the brutal tyrant who rules the Shotet people. Cyra's current gift gives her pain and power, something her brother exploits, using her to torture his enemies. But Cyra is much more than just a blade in her brother's hand. She is resilient, quick on her feet, and smarter than she knows. Akos is the son of a farmer and an oracle from the frozen nation planet of Thuvhe. Protected by his unusual current gift, Akos is generous in spirit, and his loyalty to his family is limitless. Once Akos and his brother are captured by enemy Shotet soldiers, Akos is desperate to get his brother out alive, no matter what the cost. Then Akos is thrust into Cyra's world, and the enmity between their countries and families seems insurmountable. Will they help each other to survive, or will they destroy one another? Carve the Mark is Veronica Roth's stunning portrayal of power of friendship and love in a galaxy filled with unexpected gifts. So I'm going to go ahead and read the first chapter. This is from Akos's perspective to get it started. And then afterwards, I'll just tell you a little bit more on my thoughts on the series and why you guys should read it. All right, so Chapter 1, Akos. Hushflowers always bloomed when the night was longest. The whole city celebrated the day the bundle of petals peeled apart into rich red, partly because Hushflowers was their nation's lifeblood, and partly, Akos thought, to keep them all from going crazy in the cold. That evening, on the day of the blooming ritual, he was sweating into his coat as he waited for the rest of the family to be ready, so he went out to the courtyard to cool off. The Karaseth house was built in a circle around a furnace. All the outermost and innermost walls curved, for luck, supposedly. Frozen air stung his eyes when he opened the door. He yanked his goggles down, and the heat from his skin fogged up the glass right away. He fumbled for the metal poker with his gloved hand and stuck it under the furnace hood. The burnstones under it looked just like black lumps before friction lit them, and then they sparked in different colors depending on what they were dusted with. The burnstones scraped together and lit up bright red as blood. They weren't out here to warm anything or light anything. They were just supposed to be a reminder of the current, as if the hum in Akos's body wasn't enough of a reminder. The current flowed through every living thing and showed itself in the sky in all different colors. Like the burnstones, like the lights of the floaters that zoomed overhead on their way to town proper. Off-worlders who thought their planet was blank with snow had never actually set foot on it. Akos's older brother, Ija, poked his head out. "Eager to freeze, are you? Come on, Mom's nearly ready." It was always taking their mom longer to get ready when they were going to the temple. After all, she was the oracle. Everybody would be staring right at her. Akos put the poker down and stepped inside, popping the goggles off his eyes and pulling his face shield down to his throat. His dad and his older sister, Cece, were standing out the front door, stuffed in their warmest coats. They were all made of the same material, kutia fur, which didn't take dye, so it was always white-gray and hooded. "All ready then, Akos?" "Good." His mom was fastening her own coat closed. She eyed their dad's old boots. "Somewhere out there, your father's ashes are collectively shuddering at how dirty your shoes are, Aosa." "I know, that's why I fussed about dirtying them up," their dad said with a grin at their mom. "Good," she said, almost chirped it in fact. "I like them this way." "You like anything my father didn't like." "That's because he didn't like anything." "Can we get up to the floater while it's still warm?" Ija said, a little bit of a whine in his voice. "Ori's waiting for us by the memorial." Their mother finished with her coat and put on her face shield. Down the heated front walk they bobbed, all fur and goggle and mitten. A squat round ship waited for them, hovering at knee height just above the snowbank. The door opened at their mom's touch, and they piled in. Cece and Ija had to yank Akos in by both arms because he was too small to climb on his own. Nobody bothered with safety belts. "To the temple!" their dad cried, his fist in the air. He always said that when they went to the temple, sort of like cheering for a boring lecture or a long line on voting day. If only we could bottle all that excitement and sell it all to Thuvhe. Most of them I just see once a year, and then only because there's food and drink waiting for them, their mom drawled with a faint smile. "There's your solution then," I just said. "Entice them with food all season long." "The wisdom of children," their mom said, poking the ignition button with their thumb. The floater jerked them up and forward, so they all fell into each other. Ija poked Akos away from him, laughing. The lights of Hessa twinkled up ahead. Their city wrapped around a hill, the military base at the bottom, the temple at the top, and all the other buildings in between. The temple where they were headed was a big stone structure with a dome, made of hundreds of panes of colored glass right in the middle of it. When the sun shone on it, Hessa's peak glowed orange-red, which meant it almost never glowed. The floater eased up the hill, drifting over stony Hessa, as old as their nation planet Thuvhe, as everyone but their enemies called it, a word so slippery off-worlders tend to choke on it. Half the narrow houses were buried in snowdrifts. Nearly all of them were empty. Everybody who was anybody was going to the temple tonight. "See anything interesting today?" their dad asked their mom as he steered the floater away from a particularly tall wind meter poking up into the sky. It was spinning in circles. Akos knew by the tone of his dad's voice that he was asking their mom about her visions. Every planet in the galaxy had 3 oracles, one rising, one sitting, like their mother, and one falling. Akos didn't quite understand what it meant, except that the current whispered the future in his mom's ears, and half the people they came across were in awe of her. "I may have spotted your sister the other day," their mom started. "Doubt she'd want to know, though." "She just feels the future ought to be handled with the appropriate respect for its weight." Their mom's eyes swept over Akos, Ija, and Cece in turn. "This is what I get for marrying into a military family, I guess," she said eventually. "You want everything to be regulated, even my current gift. You'll notice that I flew in the face of family expectation and chose to be a farmer, not a military captain," their dad said. "And my sister doesn't mean anything by it. She just gets nervous, that's all." Their mom said, like that wasn't all. Cece started humming a melody Akos had heard before, but couldn't say from where. His sister was looking out the window, not paying attention to the bickering. And a few ticks later, his parents' bickering stopped, and the sound of her hum was all that was left. Cece had a way about her, their dad liked to say, an ease. The temple was lit up, inside and out, strings of lanterns no bigger than Akos's fists hanging over the arch entrance. There were floaters everywhere, strips of colored light wrapped around their fat bellies, parked in clusters on the hillside or swarming around the dome roof in search for a space to touch down. Their mom knew all the secret places around the temple, so she pointed their dad toward a shadowing nook next to the refectory and led them into a sprint to a side door that she had to pry open with both hands. They went down a dark stone hallway, over rugs so worn you could see right through them, and past the low candlelit memorial for the Thuvhe who had died in the Shotet invasion before Akos was born. He slowed to look at the flickering candles as he passed the memorial. Ija grabbed his shoulders from behind, making Akos gasp, startled. He blushed as soon as he realized who it was, and Ija poked his cheek, laughing. "I can tell how red you are, even in the dark." "Shut up," Akos said. "Ija," their mom chided, "don't tease." She had to say it all the time. Akos felt like he was always blushing about something. It was just a joke. They found their way into the middle of the building where a crowd had formed outside of the Hall of Prophecy. Everyone was stomping their way out of the outer booths, shrugging off coats, fluffing hair that had been flattened by hoods, breathing warm air on frozen fingers. The Karaseths piled their coats, goggles, mittens, boots, and face coverings in a dark alcove, right under a purple window with the Thuvhe character for the current etched into it. Just as they were turning back to the Hall of Prophecy, Akos heard a familiar voice. "Ij!" Ori Rednalis, Ija's best friend, came barreling down the hallway. She was gangly and clumsy looking, all knees and elbows and stray hair. Akos had never seen her in a dress before, but she was in one now made of heavy purple-red fabric and buttoned at one shoulder like a formal military uniform. Ori's knuckles were red with cold. She jumped to stop in front of Ija. "There you are. I've had to listen to 2 of my aunt's rants about the assembly already, and I'm about to explode." Akos had heard one of Ori's aunt's rants before, about the assembly, the governing body of the galaxy, valuing Thuvhe only for its ice flower production, and downplaying the Shotet attacks, calling them civil disputes. She had a point, but Akos always felt squirmy around ranting adults. He never knew what to say. Ori continued. "Hello, Eose, Sifa, Cece, Akos. Happy blooming. Come on, let's go, Ij." She said this all in one go, hardly taking the time to breathe. Ija looked at their dad, who flapped his hand. "Go on, then. We'll see you later. And if we catch you with a pipe in your mouth, as we did last year," their mom said, "we will make you eat what's inside." Ija quirked his eyebrows. He never got embarrassed about anything, never flushed. Not even when the kids at school teased him for his voice, higher than most boys, or for being rich, not something that made a person popular here in Hesse. He didn't snap back either, just had a gift for shutting things out and letting them back in only when he wanted to. He grabbed Akos by the elbow and pulled him after Ori. Cece stayed behind with their parents like always. Ija and Akos chased Ori's heels all the way to the Hall of Prophecy. Ori gasped, and when Akos saw inside the hall, he almost echoed her. Somebody had strung hundreds of lanterns, each one dusted with Hushflower to make it red, from the apex of the dome down to the outermost walls in every direction, so a canopy of light hung over them. Even Ija's teeth glowed red when he grinned at Akos. In the middle of the room, which was usually empty, was a sheet of ice about as wide as a man was tall. Growing inside it were dozens of close-up Hushflowers on the verge of blooming. More burnstone lanterns, about as big as Akos's thumb, lined the sheet of ice where the Hushflowers waited to bloom. These glowed white, probably so everybody could see the Hushflowers' true colors, a richer red than any lantern. As rich as blood, some said. There were a lot of people milling about, dressed in their finery, loose gowns that covered all but the hands and head, fastened with elaborate glass buttons in all different colors, knee-length waistcoats lined with supple LT skin, and twice-wrapped scarves, all in dark, rich colors, anything but gray or white in contrast to their coats. Akos's jacket was dark green, one of Ija's old ones, still too big in the shoulders for him, and Ija's was brown. Ori led the way to the food. Her sour-faced aunt was there, offering plates to passers-by, but she didn't look at Ori. Akos got the feeling Ori didn't like her aunt and uncle, which was why she pretty much lived at the Karaseth house, but he didn't know what had happened to her parents. Ija stuffed a roll in his mouth, practically choking on the crumbs. "Careful," Akos said to him. "Death by bread isn't a dignified way to go." "At least I'll die doing what I love," Ija said, around all the bread. Akos laughed. Ori hooked her elbow around Ija's neck, tugging his head in close. "Don't look now. Stairs coming in from the left." "So?" Ija said, spraying crumbs. But Akos already felt heat creeping into his neck. He chanced to look over at Ija's left. A little group of adults stood there, quiet, eyes following them. "You'd think you'd be a little more used to it, Akos," Ija said to him. "Happens all the time, after all." "You'd think they would be used to us," Akos said. "We lived here all of our lives. We've had fates all our lives. What's there to stare at?" Everyone's had a future, but not everyone had a fate. At least, that's what their mom liked to say. Only parts of certain favored families got fates. Witnessed at the moment of their births by every oracle on every planet, in unison. When those visions came, their mom said, they could wake her from a sound sleep, they were so forceful. Ija, Cece, and Akos had fates. Only they didn't know what they were, even though their mom was one of the people who had seen them. She said she didn't need to tell them. The world would do it for her. The fates were supposed to determine the movements of the worlds. If Akos thought about that too long, he got nauseous. Ori shrugged. "My aunt said the assembly's been critical of the oracles on the newsfeed lately, so it's probably just on everyone's minds." "Critical?" Akos said. "Why?" Ija ignored them both. "Come on, let's find a good spot." Ori brightened. "Yeah, let's. I don't want to get stuck staring at other people's butts like last year." "I think you've grown past butt height this year," Ija said. "Now you're at mid-back, maybe." "Oh, good, because I definitely put on this dress for my aunt so I could stare at a bunch of backs." Ori rolled her eyes. This time Akos slipped into the crowd in the Hall of Prophecy first, ducking under glasses of wine and stooping gestures until he got to the front, right by the ice sheet and the closed-up Hushflowers. They were right on time, too. Their mom was up by the ice sheet, and she had taken off her shoes, though it was chilly in here. She said she was better at being an oracle when she was closer to the ground. A few ticks ago he'd been laughing with Ija, but as the crowd went quiet, everything in Akos went quiet, too. Ija leaned in close to him and whispered in his ear, "Do you feel that? It's like the current's humming like crazy in here. It's like my chest is vibrating." Akos hadn't noticed it, but Ija was right. He did like the feel his chest was vibrating, like his blood was singing. Before he could answer, though, their mom started talking. Not loud, but she didn't have to be, because they all knew the words by heart. "The current flows through every planet in the galaxy, giving us its light as a reminder of its power." As if on cue, they all looked up at the current stream, its lights showing through the sky like red glass of the dome. At this time of year, it was almost always dark red, just like the Hushflowers, like the glass itself. The current stream was the visible sign of the current that flowed through all of them, in every living thing. It wound across the galaxy, binding all the planets together like beads on a single string. "The current flows through everything that has life," Cyra went on, "creating a space for it to thrive. The current flows through every person who breathes breath, and emerges differently through each mind sieve. The current flows through every flower that blooms in the ice." They scrunched together, not just Akos and Ija and Ori, but everyone in the whole room, standing shoulder to shoulder, so they could all see what was happening to the Hushflowers in the ice sheet. "The current flows through every flower that blooms in the ice," Cyra repeated, "giving them the strength to bloom in the deepest dark. The current gives the most strength to the Hushflower, our marker of time, our death-giving and peace-giving blossom." For a while there was silence, and it didn't feel odd like it should have. It was as if there was all hum-buzz singing together, feeling the strange force that powered their universe, just like friction between particles powered the burnstones. And then, movement. A shifting petal, a creaking stem. A shudder went through the small field of hushflowers growing among them. No one made a sound. Akos glanced up at the red glass, the canopy of lanterns just once, and he almost missed it. All the flowers bursting open. Red petals unfurling all at once, showing their bright centers draping over their stems. The ice sheet teemed with color. Everyone gasped and applauded. Akos clapped with the rest of them until his palms itched. Their dad came up to take their mom's hands and plant a kiss on her. To everyone else, she was untouchable. Sifa Karaseth, the oracle, the one whose current gift gave her visions of the future. But their dad was always touching her, pressing the tip of his finger into her dimple when she smiled, tucking strays back into the knot she wore her hair in, leaving yellow flower fingertips on her shoulders when he was done kneading the bread. Their dad couldn't see the future, but he could mend things with his fingers like broken plates or a crack in the wall screen or a frayed hem of an old shirt. Sometimes he made you feel like he could put people back together, too, if they got themselves into trouble. So when he walked over to Akos, swung him into his arms, Akos didn't even get embarrassed. "Smallest child," his dad cried, tossing Akos over his shoulder. "Oh, not so small, actually. Almost can't do this anymore." "That's not because I'm big, it's because you're old," Akos replied. "Such words, from my own son," his dad said. "What punishment does a sharp tongue like that deserve, I wonder?" "Don't." But it was too late. His dad had already pitched him back and let him slide, so he was holding both of Akos's ankles. Hanging upside down, Akos pressed his shirt and jacket to his body, but he couldn't help laughing. Eosed lowered him down, only letting go when Akos was safe on the ground. "Let that be a lesson to you about sass," his dad said, leaning over him. "Sass causes all the blood to rush to your head," Akos said, blinking innocently up at him. "Precisely," Eosed grinned. "Happy blooming." Akos returned the grin. "You too." That night they stayed up so late that Ija and Ori both fell asleep upright at the kitchen table. Their mom carried Ori to the living room couch, where she spent a good half of her nights these days, and their dad roused Ija. Everybody went one way or another after that, except Akos and his mom. They were always the last two up. His mom switched the screen on so the assembly news played at a murmur. There were 9 nation planets in the assembly, all the biggest or most important ones. Technically, each nation planet was independent, but the assembly regulated trade, weapons, treaties, and travel, and enforced the laws in unregulated space. The assembly feed went through the nation planet after another. Water shortages on Tepes, new medical innovation on Other, pirates boarded a ship in Pytha's orbit. His mom was popping open cans of dried herbs. At first, Akos thought she was going to make a calming tonic to help them both rest, but then she went in the hall closet to get the jar of Hushflower stored on the top shelf out of the way. "I thought we'd make tonight's lesson a special one," Sifa said. He thought of her that way, by her given name, and not as Mom, when she taught him about the ice flowers. She'd taken to calling these late-night brewing sessions lessons as a joke 2 seasons ago, but now she sounded serious to Akos. Hard to say, with a mom like this. "Getting out a cutting board and cut some harva root for me," she said, and pulled on a pair of gloves. "We've used Hushflower before, right?" "In a sleeping elixir," Akos said, and he did as she said, standing on her left with cutting board and knife and dirt-dusted harva root. It was sickly white and covered in a fine layer of fuzz. "And that recreational concoction," she added. "I believe I told you it'd be useful at parties someday. When you're older." "You did," Akos said. "You said, when you're older, then too." Her mouth slanted into her cheek. Most of the time, that was the best she could get out of his mom. "The same ingredients in an older version you might use for recreation, you can also use for poison," she said, looking grave. "As long as you double the Hushflower and have the harva root. Understand?" "Why?" Akos started to ask her, but she was already changing the subject. "So," she said as she tipped the Hushflower into her own cutting board. It was still red but shriveled, about the length of her thumb. "What is keeping your mind busy tonight?" "Nothing," Akos said. "People staring at us in the blooming, maybe. They're so fascinated by the fate favored. I would love to tell you they would stop staring someday," she said with a sigh, "but I'm afraid that you will always be stared at." He wanted to ask her about that pointed "you," but he was careful around his mom during their lessons. Ask her the wrong question, and she ended the lesson all of a sudden. Ask the right one, and he could find out things he wasn't supposed to know. How about you, he asked her. What's keeping your mind busy, I mean? Ah, his mom's chopping was so smooth, the knife tapping on the board. His was getting better, although he still carved chunks where he didn't mean to. Tonight I am plagued by the thoughts about the family Novak. Her feet were bare, toes curled under from the cold, the feet of an oracle. They are the ruling family of Shotet, she said, the land of our enemies. The Shotet were a people, not a nation planet, and they were known to be fierce, brutal. They stained lines into their arms for every life they had taken, and trained even their children in the art of war. And they lived on Thuvhe, the same planet as Akos and his family, though the Shotet didn't call this planet Thuvhe or themselves Thuvesets. Across a huge stretch of feather grass, the same feather grass that scratched the windows of Akos' family house. His grandmother, his dad's mom, had died in one of the Shotet invasions, armed only with a bread knife, or so his dad's stories said. And the city of Hesse still wore the scars of Shotet violence. The names of the lost carved into the low stone walls, broken windows patched up instead of replaced, so you could still see the cracks. Just along the feather grass, sometimes they felt close enough to touch. The Novak family is fate-favored. Did you know that? Just like you and your siblings are, Cyra went on. The oracles didn't always see fates in that family line. It happens only within my lifetime. And when it did, it gave the Novaks leverage over the Shotet government to seize control, which has been in their hands ever since. I didn't know that could happen. A new family suddenly getting fates, I mean. Well, those of us who are gifted in seeing the future don't control who gets a fate, his mom said. We see hundreds of futures, of possibilities. But a fate is something that happens to a particular person in every single version of the future we see, which is very rare. And those fates determine who the fate-favored families are, not the other way around. He'd never thought about it that way. People always talked about the oracles doling out fates like presents to special, important people, but to hear his mom tell it, that was all backward. Fates made certain families important. So you've seen their fates, the fates of the Novaks. She nodded. Just the son and the daughter, Ryzek and Cyra. He's older, she's your age. He'd heard their names before, along with some ridiculous rumors. Stories about them frothing at the mouth, or keeping enemies' eyeballs in jars, or lines of kill marks from wrist to shoulder. Maybe that one didn't sound so ridiculous. Sometimes it is easy to see what people become, and they are, his mom said softly. Ryzek and Cyra, children of a tyrant. Their father, Lasmet, child of a woman who murdered her own brothers and sisters. The violence infects each generation. She bobbed her head, and her body went with it, rocking back and forth. And I see it. I see all of it. Akos grabbed her hand and held on. I'm sorry, Akos, she said. And he wasn't sure if she was saying sorry for saying too much, or for something else, but it didn't really matter. They both stood there for a while, listening to the mutter of the newsfeed, the darkest night, even somehow darker than before. Alright, so that was the first chapter of, once again, this book called Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. It is a little bit of a lengthy read, but it is so good, especially seeing the development between all of these fated people. So basically everyone in Akos' family is fate-favored, and then this other family that you'll get to meet the character of Cyra is also fate-favored for pretty much not so great reasons. So there's going to be a lot of conflict happening between these families. There's a lot of twists and turns, like things that you would never expect from the beginning of the book to happen. And then it is a series, so the second book, I have the second book. It's linked to this specifically. I'm trying to think of the name of the sequel. But yeah, it goes along with Carve the Mark. So there's one more book. And then I did want to show you guys a little bit of a preview just to give you an idea of some of the other books that we might be exploring. So I got all of these books, and then there's a couple more books coming. And those were generously donated by someone who reached out to give me books about diversity for my classroom. So there's going to be 16 books total. So I wanted to show you guys these books to give you some thinking of which books that you might want me to go over. I'm going to try to actually cover them all. So I'm going to start with like these smaller books at the top, because these reads can be done in like a day or two if you're a fast reader, or if you're a slower reader, it might take you like at most like 4 or 5 days to read it, because they're like close to like just under 200 pages or just over 200 pages. So those are a lot shorter books, which will mean that we'll get through a lot more of them. And then I'll get back to some of like these other ones that I really like to read, like the dystopian YAs and stuff like that. So these are all going to be books from different cultures. A lot of them are predominantly from African American culture, just because I feel like that's something that's really taking place right now and people are really focusing on right now. But some of these other ones, like this one, is more like Middle Eastern. Let's see. This one's kind of like a mix between Hispanic culture and African American culture. All y'all know this one, The Hate You Give. This one's pretty popular too, Dear Martin. I won't be able to read Dear Martin because it's got a lot of bad language in it, but it is something that is interesting to read. These two are actually going to be poetry books. This one, I believe, is Filipino culture. This one is, I think, it's an Asian culture. I'm not sure if it's Filipino or if it's another culture. It might be Korean or something. I'm not sure. But when I get through those, like I said, those will be ones that'll be added on, and I'll post a picture of that so that you guys can give me your opinion on which ones you want to read. Here's some more books that I just got as well. So this one's part of, if you've heard of the Match series, this one's the second one. So I'm going to look at that. Just Mercy is one that's really popular right now as a book to educate yourself more on African American culture. This one is by that author that I told you I really liked, Marie Lu, and that's one of her newest books, so I'm going to read that. This one by Veronica Roth is actually related to the book I just read, Carve the Mark. So this one's going to be like a couple of short stories that go along with it. This one, for those of you who are my students, and we were going to start that inclusivity unit right before spring break, this one's going to go along with that. It's called Out of My Mind. And then this one is called Thunderbird. Thunderhead. And this is going to be the second one to the Scythe series, which I'm going to probably be giving an overview of the Scythe series as one of my books. Once I get through like that big pile that I just showed you, then I'll probably go back to like Scythe and some of those other more dystopian books, because Scythe is really, really good. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a preview of some upcoming books that we're going to be looking at. Once again, if you guys want to go ahead and shoot me some of your suggestions for books of ones that I haven't covered yet that you really like to read or that you're interested in reading, I'll be sure to add some of those in there. My next one hopefully will be this Thursday, so be looking out for that. And before I go, I want to talk a little bit about the Hunger Games prequel, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm almost done with it. I'm like it's a 517 page book, so I'm on like the last 100 pages or less of the book. It's really good, and when you get towards the end, you really start seeing those connections between the Hunger Games. And I don't want to give away too much because I know some people have not read that yet, and it's a really new book, so I don't want to give any spoilers. But I am interested. Please message me if you've been reading that book, because I want to discuss some stuff with y'all. There's some interesting connections that I see, like possibly between his story and Katniss's story. So I want to see what you guys think about that without giving too much information away, because I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be in the last 100 pages. I hope it's going to be in the last 100 pages and explain things, but I'm worried that it's going to leave me on a cliffhanger to like wonder what happened instead of telling me what happened. So we'll see. All right. Thank you for watching this. If you view this video, please remember to share these videos so that others can see them as well, people who might be interested in these books or just reading in general. And please share, especially for those for the next time around and next week when I start getting into that pile of diversity books, because I really think that's going to be an important topic for people to look at, and hopefully you'll read some of those. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.